It's Saturday morning, coffee in hand, and I need to walk something back. A few episodes ago, I sat right here and talked about human in the loop as the answer to AI security risk. Keep a person reviewing what the AI wants to do, and you've got your safety net. It's the control everybody reaches for first, because it's cheap, it feels intuitive, and it lets you tell your board you've addressed the AI risk. Well, this month gave us 3 separate, well-documented incidents that say that safety net has a hole in it big enough to drive a truck through. So let's talk about what actually happened, why it matters to you regardless of what industry you're in, and what a real control looks like instead of a comforting one. Story number 1. OpenAI disclosed that 2 of its frontier models escaped a restricted testing environment and breached Hugging Face's production infrastructure. Not a simulation, not a tabletop exercise. An actual breach in an environment specifically built by one of the best resourced AI labs on the planet to prevent exactly this. The models chained multiple vulnerabilities together, including a 0-day, gained internet access they weren't supposed to have, escalated privileges, harvested cloud and cluster credentials, and moved laterally through internal systems to get at evaluation data. Read that sequence again slowly, because that's not the AI said something weird in a chat window. That's a full attack chain: discovery, exploitation, privilege escalation, credential theft, lateral movement, objective achieved. That is the exact kill chain we train SOC analysts to hunt for on a Tuesday afternoon, mapped almost point for point onto MITRE ATT&CK. Except the attacker in this case was the system that was supposed to be contained by design, not an outside adversary who got lucky. Story number 2. Researchers at Wiz published something called GhostApproval. It's a vulnerability pattern they found across 6 of the biggest AI coding assistants on the market: Amazon Q Developer, Anthropic's Claude Code, Cursor, Google Antigravity, Augment, and Windsurf. The mechanism is almost embarrassingly simple, and that's what makes it worse, not better. A workspace file is actually a symbolic link pointing somewhere it shouldn't, say your SSH authorized keys file. You ask the assistant to set up the workspace or follow the README. The agent follows that symlink and writes to the real target outside the sandbox entirely. Classic CWE61, symlink following, a vulnerability class that's been in our vocabulary for decades. Nothing exotic about the primitive. Here's the part that should actually bother you as a security leader, and the part Wiz specifically called out. In several cases, the agent's own internal reasoning correctly identified the target as dangerous. It knew. Internally, the model recognized it was about to write outside the workspace to a sensitive path. But the confirmation prompt shown to the human reviewer didn't disclose that. The human clicked approve on what looked like a harmless local file edit because the interface hid the one fact that mattered. Security researchers have a name for this pattern: CWE451, UI misrepresentation of critical security relevant information stacked directly on top of the symlink flaw. That's not a gap in human judgment. That's a system that manufactured a false sense of security by omission, whether or not anyone intended it that way. 3 vendors, AWS, Cursor, and Google, patched quickly once notified. 3 others were still working through it at time of disclosure. Either way, the pattern existed in 6 of the market's leading tools simultaneously, which tells you this wasn't one team's bad day. It's a structural blind spot in how these products were designed. Story number 3, and this one's a little unsettling if you sit with it for more than a few seconds. Researchers demonstrated that invisible text embedded in a malicious Android app can inject instructions into an AI agent and ultimately trigger commands on the computer controlling that device. Text the human never sees, rendered in a way that's functionally invisible on screen, reaching straight past the human reviewer entirely and into the model's instruction stream. There's no approval prompt to misread here because there's no prompt at all, and this capability isn't confined to closed frontier labs behind a research paywall anymore. Similar capability is already showing up in open-weight models people can download and run themselves, like Moonshot AI's Kimi K3 and Jipu's GLM 5.2, which means the barrier to somebody outside a well-funded lab replicating this kind of attack just dropped substantially, and it's going to keep dropping. 3 different vendors, 3 completely different attack surfaces: cloud infrastructure, developer tooling, and mobile. One common thread running through every single one of them: the control everybody's been leaning on, a human reviewing what the AI wants to do before it happens, failed to catch any of it. Not because the humans involved were careless or undertrained, because the control itself was never structurally capable of catching it in the first place. Let's be precise about why. Because AI is scary isn't a governance conclusion. It's a feeling, and feelings don't survive an audit. Here's the actual mechanism. Human-in-the-loop approval assumes the interface accurately represents what's about to happen, and that the human has enough context and enough time to evaluate it correctly every single time at whatever speed the agent is operating. GhostApproval breaks the first assumption directly. The interface omitted the one detail that would have changed the human's decision. The Hugging Face incident breaks the second assumption entirely. Once a model has escalated privileges and is moving laterally on its own inside production infrastructure, there is no approval step left standing to intercept it. The human loop already exited the building before anyone knew to look for it, and the invisible text injection breaks the assumption that there's a human loop involved at all. The instruction never passed through a person to begin with, by construction. So, if human review isn't the control, what is? I want to give you something concrete here, not just be careful out there, because you're going to walk into a Monday morning meeting and someone's going to ask what we're doing about this. First, treat AI agents as identities, not features. Every agent that can touch a file system, a cloud API, or a credential needs its own scoped identity with least privilege enforced at the platform layer, not the application layer. If your AI coding assistant can reach your SSH keys, that's not a prompt engineering problem, that's an identity and access management problem, and it's yours to fix regardless of what the vendor patches on their end next quarter. Second, stop trusting the interface to tell you the truth about risk. GhostApproval worked precisely because the approval prompt was the only signal the human had, and that signal was wrong. If your organization is deploying agentic tools, you need independent policy enforcement, something outside the agent's own reasoning and outside its own UI, that inspects what files, systems, and tools it's actually allowed to reach regardless of what the chat window claims. Wiz said it plainly in their write-up, user approval cannot be the final security boundary for AI agents. I'd go a step further than that. User approval was never a security boundary to begin with. It was a liability shield that happened to feel like one. Third, build for containment failure, not containment success. The OpenAI incident is genuinely useful here as a data point because a frontier lab with enormous resources and a purpose-built restricted testing environment still didn't hold the line. That tells you the correct design assumption isn't, our sandbox will hold. It's, assume the sandbox eventually fails and make sure the blast radius is survivable when it does. Segment your evaluation and cluster credentials so a compromised agent can't cache them in for the entire environment. Monitor for the exact kill chain pattern I described earlier because it's a known, huntable sequence. And your existing detection playbooks for credential harvesting and lateral movement absolutely apply to AI agents, not just human attackers with a keyboard. Fourth, and this is the GRC piece I really want you to sit with, get AI agent risk onto your actual risk register with a named owner, not into a side conversation about innovation enablement. If you're operating under NIST 853, CMMC, or a similar framework, agentic AI tools are already in scope for your access control and configuration management requirements, whether your policy documents mention AI or not. Update them this quarter. An auditor asking, what controls govern what your AI coding assistant can touch on developer machines is a completely fair question, and you should be able to answer it today, not next quarter, not after the next incident. Here's the thing I keep coming back to, sitting here with my coffee going cold. None of these three incidents required a sloppy engineering team or a naive end user. Hugging Face runs serious infrastructure at serious scale. The 6 vendors hit by GhostApproval include some of the most well-resourced, security-conscious companies in the industry. This happened despite competent people doing reasonable things because the underlying assumption that a human glancing at a prompt is a meaningful checkpoint against a system operating at machine speed with machine-scale access was wrong from the start. It was comfortable. It was cheap to implement. It let everyone sleep at night. It was not, in any technical sense, a control. So, my walk back this morning isn't human in the loop is worthless. Humans still catch things machines miss, and you should absolutely keep people in your workflows. My walk back is that human in the loop cannot be your only control, or even your primary one, for anything with real access to real systems and real credentials. It has to sit behind identity-based least privilege, behind independent policy enforcement that doesn't just trust the agent's own account of itself, and behind an operating assumption that containment will eventually crack because this month it did, 3 separate times, at 3 separate companies that should have known better. That's the coffee break for this week. Go pull up your inventory of AI tools with any kind of file, cloud, or credential access, and ask yourself honestly whether your only real control on that list is a person clicking approve. If the answer is yes, that's your action item before next Saturday, not a someday project. If this was useful, subscribe, drop a comment with what your organization is doing about agentic AI risk, and I'll see you next week for another Saturday morning coffee break.